this computer. All right, so thanks for joining us. And let me quickly introduce the partners in crime, Mark Friend and Bill. Maybe if you guys could say something about yourselves real quick, I'll stop sharing.
Okay, I'm Bill. That's me in the upper right of your screen there. I am the founder and managing partner for Funnelcast. We are a sales optimization and forecasting platform.
Mark.
I'm Mark Friend, lifelong startup guy. Spent half my career in structured venture capital. Summit Partners, USVP were the main firms, and then have been a CEO, CFO, and COO ever since. So, a number of years at the helm, owning finance, marketing, sales, and enjoying the moment in every single company where the leader of sales and the leader of marketing look at each other and say your data is wrong, and it has never failed to not happen, and is one of the interesting challenges, and wanted to address some of that today.
Great. Oh, thank you. All right, so then that's sort of my partners in crime here. This is a highly paraphrased version of what we're going to go through, but and I'm being somewhat cynical, but not too cynical, that most forecasting processes look like what's going on the left. And one of the reasons is their primary purpose is really to make whoever is the presenter make it into the next meeting and not necessarily to report analytical truth. And so you get a lot of eye candy, but not necessarily deep rigor under the hood. And that's one of the reasons why we want to present. And really, what I'm showing on the right hand side, those of you that know Premonio obviously know the sand key, which is what this is on the right hand side. And I'll show you a quick demo of the product. We just got funded, and so we're actually busily developing a dynamic version of the sand key that you can actually use for planning purposes. And then at the bottom is one of the key charts that comes out of Bill's product Funnelcast, which, by my estimation is the most nuclear powered forecasting package out there on the market. If you want to have high accuracy, that's the way to go. And so what we'll do today is I'm just finished framing the meeting. I'll talk a little bit about our approach. What are some of the key elements of our approach if you're a small company with no or bad data? And then Bill is going to talk about it. If you graduate up from Premonio, what actually do you need to do to have more precise, more accurate forecasting techniques? And then Mark's going to actually pepper us with a whole series of questions. Several in the audience have actually pre-sent questions earlier, and then he also has some of his own, and then we'll go from there. Those of you that know us, this is pretty, how should I say, direct and pretty brisk process, and don't hold back. So, all right, any questions before I dive into it, or does this make sense? All right, I'll take that as a yes. So I think I'm going to talk about the imagine what you're solving for is high predictive accuracy and budget optimization, which is really when you think about growth planning and forecasting what you want to solve for. Number one, how do I um, commit to a number or agree to a number that I can hit at the end of the year and the next year, and I have a high predictive accuracy of actually hitting that number. And then secondly, how do I make sure that I can get there without having to overspend sorry, my cat's coming here,
There goes
having to
Fritzy.
overspend my budget to get there. And if you go through that line of fundamental reasoning, you end up in an area where you begin to realize that I have to have a forecasting approach that doesn't require prior data. And so I would talk a little bit about that. I'll talk about the digital revenue twin concept. One way to do that is to actually build a facsimile of your company. And I'll talk about a couple of approaches, namely what we refer to as right to left, meaning dollars to data, versus left to right, meaning facts to forecasts. And what this means is most forecasting approaches rely on prior data and then they project forward based on the past data whether or not you can hit your number. The problem with that approach is you don't have 9 months worth of data in order to make a prediction. When you start a company, for example, right now I'm working with an AI company, they have no prior data. What they need is what we call right to left or dollars to data, meaning they want to go in and say, I want to hit 3 million, 5 million, $10 million. How do I get there? And that is really a key part of the planning process. So I'll do a very quick presentation of what that can look like, and then I'll hand it over uh, to Bill. Okay. And let me do this. So the idea of the digital twin, this is actually a concept that goes back to the early Apollo space program days. I don't know if you remember the Apollo 13 movie, and certainly also those of us that actually remember the actual event. That was obviously a massive reset, very tragic. And one of the things that they said is, why don't we build a digital twin of our entire system? And at this point, it's very commonplace to do that for airplane manufacturer, automobile manufacturer. So before they even bend one piece of metal, they build out the entire airplane, the entire car, or manufacturing process in a digital facsimile. And what you then do is you do backwards and forwards comparisons between the real object and your digital facsimile, your digital twin. Well, it turns out late last year, Gartner wrote a piece on digital revenue twin. And in fact, if you enter www.digitalrevenuetwin.com and you click past the uncertain button, you'll get to the Premonio website. And the idea is that you basically, before you spend real money, build a representative facsimile of your go-to-market operation, and then you can play around with it. I'll show you what that can look like. And this is a little bit of a preview of our upcoming product that's being built. I spare you the login process. I've already have a, a model loaded, so you can build basically different go-to-markets. And one of the things you can do, for example, is you can go in here and you can see, oh, for my BD self-gen, where I want to make $63,000, here's my underlying assumptions, and you can also then double click into that to go into the KPIs. What does the
Excuse
team
me,
do?
sorry, let me interrupt. We're not seeing your slides. If you're trying to show us slides, they have gone away.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, let
Try
me do this.
ending it and
I was
restarting it.
seeing a UI.
I saw it as
I'm
well
not seeing
here.
anything. All right.
How about now? Can you
Sorry to
see it?
interrupt.
No, no worries. I'm glad you brought it up. Can you
I see your
see
browser
the
now.
screen now?
I can see it now with the sound key.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so maybe there was a refresh issue. All right, so this is basically an attempt at giving an illustration of a digital twin concept. So I have a demo loaded. This is a dynamic sand key. Those of you that are familiar with Premonio are familiar with the earlier versions of the sand key, which is static. So this one, you can double click into it. You can play around and you can say, well, gee, I'm trying to, get more money out of trade shows, and you can see how the trade show bucket gets bigger and bigger. And I can go in and I can start looking at what are my new assumptions on the right-hand side and what are my new KPIs. The other thing that you can do is you can do comparisons. Back to the idea that the digital twin allows you to simulate what you're going to do in the real world. I can say, okay, I'll click my demo and I'm going to compare it. I don't know, let me pick some maybe big referrals. And you can see how the two compare. So if you want to do a go-to-market optimization where I'm trying to see where and how do I spend my money, which programs do I invent, these are the kinds of things you want to do in a digital twin so that you can optimize your go-to-market before you actually spend real money on the market. I'll switch venues again. So if you don't see what I'm showing, then let me know. But very quick, just an overview of several of the key points that I'm trying to make. Build a digital twin. We have a tool like that, obviously, but you can also do some of it yourself. Do the experimentation digitally and then start spending money. A key piece there is to calculate budget efficiency. How much am I spending on each of these sources versus how much I should be getting, so I know whether or not I'm efficiently spending my money. With that said, I'll hand it off to Bill. He's going to do a similarly rapid fire presentation of Funnelcast, and then we'll get into the questions.
Okay, rapid fire it is. Here we go. So Johannes gave you a preview of something that looked like this. This is it's kind of the core of the analysis that a lot of people try to do, and unfortunately do it in a very superficial way and get it wrong. So what we're showing here is a lot of the title of this Revinar is conversion rate confusions. And one of the confusions is that people try to manage their business by looking at the conversion rate from one stage to the next. And if you think about it, it's a little bit misguided because conversions are not what pay the bills, it's wins that pay the bills, right? And so what you really want is not to measure the conversions from each stage, but the wins from each stage. And that's what this is measuring. And so the key thing here is instead of measuring conversion from stage 1 to stage 2, for example, you measure the win rate or the percent won that entered a stage. So the starting event here on the left is a deal entered a stage. I'm going to pick this one here, the demo POC stage. And you can see that this is in our product right above here. You can see the stage I'm pointing to. And the problem that most people encounter is that what they do is they compute, whether they realize it or not, they're computing what we call the static or terminal win rate. If you wait for a deal to settle out, if you give it enough time, it's the right edge of this curve here. So win rate though is a function of time after entering the stage. So for this example in the demo POC stage, the way to read this is at 50 days after entering the stage, about 31% are closed won. And you can read that on the left side there, or you can read it up top there as I'm, sort of hovering over this. So the point is every stage in your sales process has a win rate curve, and you don't really care about conversions because a conversion, if you try to maximize conversions, you can push unqualified deals further into the process and gum up the works at the later stages with deals that are ultimately not going to be won. So that's the first concept, is win rates are a function of time. And importantly, if you measure win rates the way most people do, you're measuring the right edge. But if you're trying to make a forecast for, say, a quarter, and let's say you're 45 days through the quarter, and you're looking at deals here in this stage, you can see about 30% of them will be won with 40, in this case, 43 days remaining in the quarter. But if you were using the terminal win rate, you'd have a much higher win rate. You'd have a 50% win rate. So you'd be off by almost a factor of 2. So it's really important to understand win rates as a function of time. This is something that we do in our product. It's something we teach people to do. We've got countless blogs on this, and I've got a reference slide later on to show you that. So if you do this, though, the next thing you can do is there we go. You can produce forecasts. You can use all of the scores that you get on each deal, the probabilities essentially from those curves, to combine that with a simulation technique called Monte Carlo simulation, and you can get a probability distribution. Or what is probability distribution? This is a distribution of possible outcomes to the quarter. And again, Johanna said this before, but we underscore, in our case, we're dealing with businesses that have significant data. Johannes is dealing very early stage where you don't have data, and you really have to do hypothetical analyses. We're saying, we're dealing with people that are past the hypothetical analysis, and you're into actually empirically measuring those win rates and then imposing them on top of every deal, and then using those to produce a simulated set of outcomes and helping you understand what are the possibilities. So, for example, this is one of the most important things we think you can understand is what's the probability of getting to a number instead of what's the average number or the expected number. In this case, that blue line there is the average of all possible outcomes So there's a 50% chance of getting there. It's 2.5 million. You can read just below my cursor there. But on the left edge here, which is this shaded area, there's about a 90% chance of getting to be over 2.03 million. So this enables you to communicate much more a nuanced view of what's going to happen for your quarter or where you likely could end, instead of calling a single number, which you'd only be right if you called that number, you'd only be right half the time, or right being over it. It's almost impossible to land exactly on that number. So that is the one thing you can get from those scores. And then even more important, you can take these scores and you can use them to build a portfolio of an optimized portfolio of deals to work on. Those are these shaded green deals here. These are all the deals in the open pipeline. And I'm going to flip over to a slide to show that here. Here we go. So the idea here is you have a set of deals that you're working on in your company, and these are all the deals that with a close date in your quarter. Typically, companies prioritize them, a subset of those deals, usually based on the size. If I ask people, how do you prioritize your deals? I get one of two answers. Based on the biggest deals get the resources first. The second thing I hear is, well, the late stage deals get the resources first. Okay, so you can look at company priority either way that you pick it, and we can pick a comparably sized portfolio of deals that will have some overlap with the company priorities. And the question then is, which one is more productive, the company priority list or the focus ranking, as we call it? And what we found is if the company priority cells produce 1x on average, and this is tested over many, many data sets over many quarters over a long period of time, the focus ranking can produce 1.6 or 60% more. So you've got win rates as a function of time that can drive probability distributions for sales outcomes that you can use to communicate to your board, so you don't disappoint the board. They understand what the possibilities are. And most important, you can drive activity and focus activity to drive additional sales so that you actually change the outcome and shift it to the right in that distribution that I showed you earlier. So that's all. I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Johannes and Mark.
All right, Mark, has the audience sent any questions already? Or I know there were a few that were sent previously, so maybe fire away. We obviously gave a very fast, rapid fire overview of the two approaches, but have at it.
Yeah, so what I saw and what I see in the two approaches is that the Promonio approach is where should I spend my resources, or what resources provide results, and the funnelcast approach is where should I spend my time. So given the fact that most companies have a forecast and they have probabilities attached to leads and they have stages and dollar amounts, what do they get wrong? What is it that they seem to be getting wrong consistently?
I'll give two answers and I'll hand it off to Bill. That's a great question. The first one that is often gotten wrong is the sales and marketing lead funnels are not connected. And so you end up having a bunch of things that are taking place over here on the marketing side. They might measure what comes in through the website. They might measure what comes in through Google Ads or events or other programs. And then there is no common denominator in terms of where and how do I hand that off to the sales side of the house for closure. And then there's also no tracking all the way through from the initial lead contact all the way through to revenue. So one thing that organizations get wrong is they don't connect the two. And as a result, you don't really know which marketing activities produce and which revenue results. And if you then, and that gets me to the second piece, if you don't associate budgets with all of those activities, you don't know what your, on a forward-looking basis, what your budget efficiency is. Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, well, so I'd underscore or repeat yours, and I'd add the one I mentioned earlier, that when people compute probabilities based on historic examples, they don't realize that the numbers they're computing are long-term win rates, the right edge of that curve. And they apply the long-term win rates to a short-term forecast and get disastrously, optimistic or exuberant forecasts that are not achievable. And so you disappoint your board, you disappoint your stakeholders, and it gets very frustrating. So, that's
I would actually add, plus the piece that you ended up your presentation on, this clear prioritization list. That's based on actuarial probabilistics versus I want to go after that deal because it's the only $3 million deal I got.
right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So when a team is focused on conversion rates, one of the things I often hear is trying to remove bottlenecks, right? Like
Yeah.
as if you can actually remove a bottleneck. By definition, there's always a bottleneck. It just moves. So
Yeah, that's right.
what
That's
happens
a
when
really good point, Mark. There's
what
always a
happens?
bottleneck. Yeah.
Yeah, what happens when and what goes wrong when I focus on, my conversion rate and oh, my conversion rate at stage X is too low.
Yeah. So let me jump in with a response here. You know, um, conversion rates. Uh, if you try to the assumption that people make when they try to optimize with conversion rates is that all of the conversion rates are independent of each other, and so you can make an improvement in one area without affecting it downstream. The reality is that there's some complex functional relationship between what you change in one stage and how it affects others. And nobody really understands that. That's a really hard problem to solve, Mark. So, you can't really optimize. This is the fundamental challenge with optimizing by only looking at conversion rates instead of win rates. You can't optimize by just trying to say, let's increase this conversion rate. What you end up doing is particularly if you comp people on maximizing that conversion rate, you will increase it, and you'll get more garbage headed downstream, and that it gums up the works, and it produces more inefficiencies in the long run than more sales. Johannes, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think the a piece that may have gotten lost in Bill's presentation, and that's also core and central to what Primonio does, is when you looked at his curves, you compare the outcome to the origin, meaning, there was an initial lead event, and now what is my win rate? How did I go from, email to closed one? How do I go from first meeting to closed one? So it's not stage to stage, it's always from the origin all the way through. And it is something that because you bypass steps, steps gets omitted, or projects go, up the lead funnel, come back down, and then they get promoted again. And what we do on the Promonio side is that we associate with that a spend budget so that you really know, when I send out 100 emails on Tuesday, 3 months later, I made $100,000, and it cost me $10,000 to send those emails out. Therefore, I have a ROI of 10x, great spend. And if you don't have that continuity all the way through where you can really backtrack to the initial contact, and then you measure from whatever origin to whatever state you want to measure, you start introducing these inaccuracies that we were talking about.
Yeah, I guess I would add to the two things we've talked about, the independence. I brought up the independence of the conversion rates. Johannes just brought up the lack of the sequential nature thing. Deals, if anybody looks at a real pipeline, and you can do this very easily, just see where do the deals start? Do they always start at stage one? Many will start later on in the process, and many skip stages, and many will sometimes, or a fewer number, but some small number will go backwards. And so you'll see out of order, starting in the middle, and skipping stages. That's actually fixable if you want to pre-process your data. For the most part, you can fix that. The independence that I mentioned, but also remember, conversion rates are static conversion rates, so they're really the ultimate if you wait forever conversion rate. So there's no concept of when deals get closed in a conversion rate model. So, people will often apply average sales cycles to it to make up for that, but that really doesn't work if you approach it with some mathematical computational rigor.
Got it. So I thought Shelley raised a great question, but before we go there, um, incorporating some of what you said, no one, no manufacturer would ever make a jet engine without simulating it in CAD, and no one would ever, NVIDIA would never make a chip without simulating the manufacturing in, um, ECAD or EDA. Um, why is it we don't simulate, or do companies simulate, the sales model? Because what I see that's common in both of these approaches is that you're actually running simulations. Correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong. Is that part of the core here?
Yeah. I'll
I
let you
would,
go, Johannes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I have, I think there's two reasons, to be honest. One reason I think has to do with the structure of the industry. Most everybody, all of these packages, whether you buy Marketo or HubSpot or Salesforce or Pipedrive, they have their marketing staff. They go out. By and large, those systems get implemented by mid-level, junior level people in the system. And so then when you do your due diligence and you do your product market research and product market fit research, you'll talk to those people. And then they say, okay, well, I'm responsible for this piece of the elephant. And so, help me optimize that. And so what ends up happening is you end up having this sort of Frankenstein approach to modeling revenue generation across the entire company. And that's a function of what's available out in the industry. And these packages don't talk to each other. So, or they do talk to each other, but the API integration is difficult. So it becomes very difficult to create that entire picture, let alone layering now the financial and the budget information. So I think that's one of the key challenges. I think the second challenge is just one of consciousness. I mean, I was blown away that Gartner actually brought this up by, I think, August, September last year, and finally brought up this idea of a digital um, revenue twin. So there's kind of an awareness issue. There's also a technical issue, and that is, and you heard me talk earlier about right to left versus left to right, or what we call dollars to data and facts to forecast. It's fairly easy to sort of say, okay, I have a bunch of actual data. This is what happened. I'm now going to create some sort of an extrapolation routine and I'll project what happens in the future. When you don't have data and you do want to do a simulation, you want to predict what happens in the future without ever having been there. That means you have to do right to left. You have to go from my dollar outcome to what do I need to do. I'm not aware of a package out there where you can go in and you can say, I want to make $10 million next year. How do I get there? And one of the reasons why that's difficult is you have to have both benchmark data, actuarial data, as well as a bit of inference logic. And this is, for example, where these AI packages can come in to help, so that you can build a realistic model that could happen if you were to go to $5 million, and then it calculates backwards what you need to see happen next Tuesday, and then you start doing the planned actual comparisons of what actually happens next Tuesday. So the right to left calculational process is more sophisticated than the left to right calculational process.
Yeah. So I would add, Mark, it's a great question. I think one of the problems that people face in sales is that it's such a high variance process that, and they make such crude models in general that, you keep trying and they're off all the time. And so you kind of give up and what's the point? There's a lot out of that's not in your control in sales. You can't control your customer got acquired. You can't control the economies on a boom or on bust. These are things that you try to sell around, but they affect the variance of the outcome and affect the usefulness of a predictive model. I also want to recognize like there's an appeal of using conversion rates because conversion rates can be measured quickly. Uh, you don't have to wait as long if you're trying to measure conversion from stage one to stage two. Uh, And this is why businesses get managed in silos, because you can say you're responsible marketing for the conversion from MQL into sales. And you've got to deliver that something that sales accepts. And so marketing goes off and does that. And then they can measure that quickly. But really, all you care about is ultimately whether or not those deals are won. It takes a lot longer to measure. And so because of the delay, it's harder to measure. So people don't do that, and they end up getting, models that are flawed because of that. The answer to that is there's no easy answer. You just have to wait until things shake out and you find out whether or not you've actually improved the win rate at one stage or another.
So I think getting to Shelley's question, we've gone from uh, attribution models were a thing about 10 years ago. And we had, source attribution, we had everything from single point attribution to U-shaped attribution. I don't even remember what that is. I just
W.
remember people talking about it to,
Yeah.
I think the industry just giving up and realizing, well, that's really kind of impossible. But um, with what you both do, how does that take into account, attribution along the way, right? So I certainly can measure eventual win rates from lead sources, but then, how do you capture, what is it in your computations that capture as Shelley eloquently says, the alchemy of, these programs working together?
It's an awesome question. It's a question I get constantly. First of all, I'll give you a negative and two positives. The negative is, I've done this, you have these 10 stages and then you have a multi-attribute model and it starts with lead and it ends with closed won. And interim was, marketing sends out the blog and then the sales guy makes a call and then they meet for drinks at the event and whatever the lead stages were. And then of course, marketing will say, well, gee, uh, you know, it's clearly our blog that won the deal. And the sales guy says, no, 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 no. It's clearly when I hung out at the bar with the guy that won the deal. So the question then becomes, well, how do you allocate weights? So that's the negative. The positive, I think, is really when you start a business, and when you start a business, means either a new business and or you're in a turnaround and you're trying to launch a new initiative. The thing you care about the most is first touch. You want to know, where do I get the process started? Is it at the airport bar, or is it by having the guy read a blog or something else, or go to GitHub, or wherever they hang out? And so what you really want to monitor is first touch as a way to get going. But then the good news is, over time, let's say we do have this digital twin that says, okay, you need to go meet people at airport bars and have them read blogs and go to GitHub. You now over time start accumulating actuarial data that you can then use in something like the funnelcast tool, where you can get higher fidelity insights on what really contributes and what are the causal drivers for sales success. But as Bill just said, that takes time. You have to have a fair amount of data to get there. So there's uh, uh, an inherent challenge. But the second piece is the second positive is, it actually, when you have this kind of a data tracking in place, it does give you the data you need, or as much data as you can get, to decide whether or not your alchemy is working. A lot of times it's called alchemy because it's sort of a black art, but by making sure that your entire funnel is instrumented, you can now suddenly see where and how do you actually make progress. And you can make the alchemy visible, which messaging and which phrasing and which value prop actually is carrying the day versus the ones that aren't, for example.
Yeah, attribution is, I think, one of the hardest problems to solve. I've not actually seen it solved. The way we address it is through segmentation by either lead source. I mean, the typical things are lead source, geography, business type. Is it, a new logo, or is it, an add-on or something like that? And that can be helpful, but, beyond that, that's a really tough problem. And I think, I would encourage people to get the basics down first before you try to get the nuances of the attribution down. What are the basics? I mean, look, I think the world of sales and or sales math is people are drowning in a sea of analytic noise. That is often improperly computed or not well understood. And you should just, most of that should go away, and just reduce it to the simplest things. Win rates, maintain stages in your CRM, maintain the amounts, and what else? Oh, close dates. If you maintain those three things, you can do a lot. And then when you get that under control, you can layer in all sorts of other factors that might affect the outcome and start looking at attribution models that work better, and help you figure out where to spend resources. But get the basics first.
So we so we have a question in the chat. I don't know who's from Quanta Networks, but how do you suggest introducing this methodology where legacy tracking is in play? Do you want to, whoever's question that is, do you want to elaborate on what you mean by legacy tracking and help state the question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. So really just understanding, I mean, I really love the methodology. I love the approach. It's sensible, it's modern, it's the future. It makes total sense. So thank you for all the work everybody's doing and contributing here. Obviously, there's a lot changing and shifting. There's going to be a shift. People have been doing things, classic human interaction. We've been doing things a certain way, whether it's working or not, they're going to defend it because it's what humans do, especially in the United States of defending it. Um, how do we get them to see the new way in a kind of gentle path? Because that's already in play, and they're going to be like, they're going to tell you it doesn't work, even though it does. But how do we get them to evolve and see this new path? Shall we say? Let me pause there.
Is that directed at a small company, for Johannes, or for companies with more data for me to address?
Yep.
It's both.
Oh,
All right. Well, go ahead,
Yeah, I
John.
mean,
Go ahead.
it goes back to my earlier comment is that every company I've either been in or involved with at a sales level, either at the board level or consulting, inevitably leader of sales turns to leader of marketing and says, your data is wrong.
Right.
And it's always because they're actually asking different questions because there's only one source of data.
Right.
But yeah, people have a way of wanting to run these things. So from an organizational and behavioral standpoint, Johannes and Bill, what have you seen? How do you get people to change, and how much of a change is it to adopt this kind of thinking?
I would say there's probably two or three determinants whether or not you're successful in switching off the legacy problem. First of all, they have to have a problem. They must have missed their forecasts in the past, or the revenue's doing this when the board expects this, and so there has to have some sort of a motivating event that it makes them want
So
to
they have
change
to be able to
direction.
admit they have a problem.
They have to admit they have a problem. Secondly,
The
that's the first
12-step
thing.
program of sales.
12-step program,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sales. That's right.
The second one is I think a lot of forecasting and a lot of growth planning is really a CYA effort. And what's their core motivation? Are they interested in uncovering analytical truth, or is this mostly to keep the job to the next board meeting? If it's the latter, you kind of walk. There's not much you can do. And the third one is somewhat connected to that. And I learned this the hard way. Most people are not structured analytical thinkers. And when you hit them up with this kind of nuclear powered approach to growth planning and forecasting, if they can't follow the logic analytically, then they have a hard time wrapping their mind around it. They might be in such deep doo-doo that they go, okay, I don't know, I have no idea what you're doing, but I'll go for it. But by and large, one of those three or two of those three have to be there. Do they have a problem? Are they comprehending the solution? And politically, is it something that they can walk through the organization? Otherwise, you just wish them luck and have them stay with them.
Yes. So it sounds like, in a way, kind of classic selling, which is, do you have a pain or problem? Yes. Have you assigned and have you identified that pain or problem? Yes. And then, is there somebody who's going to sponsor moving forward on making change or doing something differently? So that's great. That's amazing.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
you need a sponsor. You need somebody who's going to say, look, this is the way we're going to do things.
Money.
Yeah,
Hey,
and
who's
yeah,
paying?
yeah.
That's one thing. It's easier with startups because you're starting, like for example, this AI company I talked about. It's a high credibility team. They got 28 million on basically sort of semi-working prototype, and they have nothing. So for them, they're actually saying, okay, we want to get out of the chutes with the best practices framework. That's died gone to heaven. But a lot of organizations, they already have some concrete in place, and now you got to get the jackhammer out and change things up.
So
So the I would add the benefit if you have a business with real data that you can measure, that 60% gain that I showed you from that focus ranking earlier, you can actually measure that retroactively and demonstrate it. So that's a big motivator because you can actually measure empirically if you had followed the advice that the model produced last year, last month, last and so forth, and you can do that at weekly over months and so forth. You can actually compute what the difference would be, and if you show that that would have produced a significant gain, and it doesn't take much to be of interest. If you can show that significant gain, people will say maybe this is worth changing our behavior and using this instead of ad hoc processes. Which, by the way, I want to underscore: sales managers are really good at cutting through the noise to figure out what to work on. I'm not saying they're bad at it. It's just you can do better, and you can better by systematically picking an optimal portfolio of deals to work on as opposed to doing it in an ad hoc manner.
So I wanted, we're coming close to time, but I saw there were a couple hands raised.
We can go over a little bit.
Pablo, did you had a question?
Yeah, hi everyone. Good to see you, Mark. Hi, Johannes. Good to see you as well.
Hey, how are
Look,
you?
I agree with everything Bill was saying. I mean, the challenge here is that conversion rates are necessarily are backward looking, right? They're a result, right? And so are metrics, and it's the metrics that you control that end up in a conversion rate. So what is it that controls the metrics? And that's always behaviors, processes, and skills, right? Of the people who are actually doing the processes, right? So if it's sales, right, you're hopefully using, I think Bill mentioned time and stage is a critical one. I completely agree, right? So as you're developing these processes, you have to unfortunately get, in my opinion, more prescriptive as to what are those behaviors, process, and skills people are following. So fine, you did a playbook, but it doesn't have exit criteria on a stage basis, right? So it then gets to be a lot more difficult to measure, the effectiveness of it. I agree that doing focus deals may help you, but across your process, improving the behaviors, process, and skills of the people involved, be it in marketing or sales, is really the focus of what I think your first line management team needs to have. So they jump in when if a process is 30 days and 30 days for negotiation and they're out at day 75, somebody should be jumping in, right? As opposed to reporting it at the end of quarter. And as you guys have said, there are lots of ways that people can collect, results, be they called conversion rates or metrics. But what someone referred to as the alchemy of sales kind of thing, right? The magic is kind of really just getting into the nitty gritty and doing the basic blocking and tackling of working through a deal and every deal, which is what managers do, right? And the skills can be coaching, but for instance, people fall in love with like big sales training things, MedPick, and it's a great system, but I mean, what you may actually need is demo training, right? How to get people, how to get a greater percentage of people out of demo stage into proposal stage, right? So that is those kind of metrics would focused in on that first line management of marketing or sales. I think is something that can improve your entire process, and then it'll show up in metrics and conversion rates.
That's a great point. Let me add to that real quick, and then I think Shally had raised her hand too. Um, the one thing that we're both saying, and again, there's a little bit, we're bearing the lead a little, but let's assume that we take what you just said as a starting point. What both of the applications allow you to do, you can actually scenario model through what those strategies are. So if the sales rep comes in and says, you know what, I'm going to take them to a cruise in the Caribbean, if you have a digital twin that sort of accurately models what your organization does, you can actually model that and see whether or not it's going to cost you more than what you're going to gain. And that's the piece that's missing. So the optimization on a forward-looking basis, I have these 12 ideas of how I'm going to deal with my pipeline challenges. Let me model them through to see which one is actually has a high probability of success versus, okay, well, let's take them to the Caribbean and see what happens. And then, the money's spent.
I think if you can get down to that level of granularity where it's easier for a manager to then justify, I'm going to do demo training again, right? And I expect a 2% increase in transition from demo to proposal stage, kind of thing, right? The extent you model that, it makes it much easier to justify investments in different areas, right? As opposed to saying we're going to do training, kind of thing, right?
All right. Maybe Mark, is Shelley still on, or I can't see it?
Yeah, Shelley, go ahead.
Yeah, excellent. I felt like I was taking up a lot of. So I'm interested in what you're saying, Bill, about measuring on essentially velocity, right? On time to sale. Is that in my fair and kind of?
Time to win. Yeah, that's a time to win from a starting event, which could be creating an opportunity or entering a stage, whatever you define as a starting event, relevant starting event that you want to model.
Okay, and I'm understanding that you're saying that your sort of your provocative idea is to not measure sales stages at all.
Oh, no. Measure stages. It's really is important. The important thing is to measure a win rate from a stage rather than a conversion rate to a stage, because conversion rates, as we pointed out, they're not always sequential. They're not independent of each other, and they don't tell you anything about time. So conversion rates are flawed in that way. But a win rate by stage avoids all those problems. The deals don't have to be sequential. They don't have to be independent of each other. And you get fundamentally time is baked into the model.
So it's kind of flipping the MEDDIC thing on its head. It's your I was just trying to understand how if you're not looking at stage B to C conversion, then what is the metric that feeds the velocity? Like
whether it was
does
one,
that make it that we only say that we win if each stage goes straight to a close?
not straight to a close, but eventually it does. So the idea is a deal entered stage 2 6 months ago, and it was in stage 3, 4, 5, and eventually closed today. You have 6 months time to close for that deal. That's a 6-month time to win. And another deal might have been won today, but it only took 30 days to get won. And you ignore all the stuff in the middle. All you care about is the start and the ending event that you care about, which is a one deal, and of course the amount.
To paraphrase, you don't measure A to B, B to C, C to D. You measure A to win, B to win, D to win.
Thank you.
And at the risk of throwing a softball here, it seems like the idea of digital twinning plus that time-based approach gives you an opportunity to do what I was asking and what Mark was talking about and Pablo too, where you can take point in time measurements, like the cruise. I took them on the cruise, and that happened, and that on the digital twin, I'm not sure how to feed the model this way, but it seems like there's an opportunity here to start thinking about how that alchemy can show up. So some of those VOI things, not ROI things.
Yeah, so we get asked this kind of question a lot. There's certain key events that really are important in the sales process, and they're really indicative of a good deal that's going to move forward. And my response to that is, great. You should have that as either a gate in your sales process or an explicit stage in your sales process. Those are the things that if you institutionalize those, you can improve the overall sales process for everyone in the organization.
The way to track that is technically under the hood. It may not be a lead, you may not have a lead stage called Cruise to in the Caribbean, but you
But
may
it could
call
be a
it
gate to a stage, is my
yeah,
point.
or you can call it a campaign. And as long as you have that as an identifiable event in your lead data set and there's a budget associated with it, you can then calculate either its effectiveness as a first touch lead source, or if you have an attribution model, its effectiveness as a multi-touch attribution. And then there's a certain amount of judgment involved. If the cruise costs $100,000 and you closed a $50,000 deal, you don't have to do a lot of analysis to realize that was a bad spin. But if it only costs you $500, but the key is to collect the data.
The cruise is probably a bad example. I'm after Johannes. I'm always trying to figure out how do we metric branding, storytelling, all of that stuff. Everybody says they want it. Then when they have it, it's like, no, we don't need that. So
yeah, it's
so,
the conversion. I mean, it is to some extent the win rates that he's talking about. And the good news is I've seen it the before and the after, and there's always two things that go together. It's your ICP definition and it's your the associated differentiation and messaging. And if I have that really well defined, I know exactly who I'm selling into. And secondly, I know the WIFM and I know how to tell the story and I know how to tell it compoundingly, and I can then track at the campaign level. Usually it pops right out, but you do have to track the data. So you can say, new old messaging campaign, blah, 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 new messaging campaign, and you start showing the differences in win rate. And in almost all cases, I've seen as high as a 4x increase in conversion rates, sorry for the term, or win rates, when the ICP and the messaging was dialed in. And the problem ends up being it's less, you don't have a computational tool that allows you to calculate the ROI. But what you can do with a tool like Funnelcast or ours is you can go in and say, I spend $100,000 for the branding campaign. It impacted the win rates here, here, and here. And I can show, the campaigns that were run with it had superior performance here, here, and here, and you can calculate an ROI. The problem is less that it's not calculatable. The problem is that it's the data usually doesn't get collected, and so therefore you can't tell the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good point. You have to have the data to do the analysis. Yeah, and this is another problem we see frequently. People will say, "Oh, we need to do this analysis. Let's use this field," and we look at this field, and it says 2% of the data is populated there. And there's really not much you can say if only 2% of your records have the information completed. So this is very typical. So this is one of the reasons we typically say, keep it simple. Model based on the things that you understand and you have right now that you have. What do you have? The things I mentioned before: stage, amount, and close dates.
So Shelley, does that answer your question, or I want to make sure you get what you need?
Partly, but I think I could take up way too much time going into the other stuff. So.
No, it's an awesome. I mean,
Great
to be
question.
honest, it's actually a question that's near and dear to my heart because a lot of what?
I said in the chat that I ask you this 3 times a year, but
Yeah.
but I'm still not because of your answer, but because I think it's hard to find. But I'm still hungry for what is the metric that feeds into that model. Like you're saying, the messaging campaign is working or not. I mean, how do we what?
It depends. It depends on the campaign. I mean, some of it might be early funnel, so it'll show up in your lead volume rate or your lead to MQL conversion rates. A lot of times it shows up mid funnel. If the narrative is tight and you're now getting into the demo stage and you give the demo and the demo has a nice narrative and the competitive differentiation is worked out, your demo rates go up. So those are the kinds of early or mid funnel indicators that'll you can measure that. And if you can track it at the campaign level so that you can see, here's the 5 sales guys that used this new messaging and here's the 5 sales guys that didn't, and you show the differentials, it usually shows up.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
let me make one comment on linking this together, and then I'll give Johannes and Bill the last word. So, um, as a CEO, and in fact, I kind of hit this aha moment talking to one of Johannes's groups, is that I spend 90% of my time storytelling, right? So, getting the story right, what's the narrative, and that leads into everything else, into how we do sales. And when we look at the conversion rates or win rates, and we look at bottlenecks, it gives us some clues. Or if I simulate what deals should I be working on, right? It can give me some clues as to where am I missing? Because in Silicon Valley and probably worldwide, there's three kinds of salespeople, and the majority of them are order takers. They don't sell. And then there are socket salesmen, which are people who are selling to a known problem and a known solution. So a database, right? So someone at MongoDB, versus Splunk versus Oracle versus whatever. It's, hey, my buyer has a budget. They need a database. It's a question of, do they need A, B, or C? And I have to throw feeds and speeds and data at them so that they can make that decision. And then there's the rare, strategic salesperson who actually goes out there and sells. And those are fewer and farther between. But I think that both of these forms of models can help teams, if they look at the data, as they look at what data or what stages are reaping, and how they're reaping success, and what initial leads or spends are creating wins. I think looking at win criteria can give you a lot of evidence and point you in the right direction, but will never replace the challenges, especially for younger companies, of the need for storytelling. And that's positioning, that's product focus, that's product differentiation, all the above. That's my experience. But Johannes and Bill, you guys have the last word. We'll start with.
No, I think we're up at the hour, so and I have to go to a meeting, as do others. But actually, great, passionate discussion. I love it. Thanks for everybody's input. I always love a good debate, and what we have today, or this discussion today, is really kind of the bleeding edge of thinking about growth planning and revenue forecasting, and so it's nice to see this much interest in people that are actually passionate about the topic.
Likewise, but great to be here, and we're at the top of the hour. So I'll leave you with one thought. When you're doing this, get the simple, basic stuff done first. Simplicity rules, then layer in all the other stuff once you've got that working. You can do a lot with just the basics.
Yeah, agreed. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, guys.
And we'll see you soon. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Great.